And we had a problem with the Meraglim. We didn't understand what was going on with the Meraglim. How could they have the tightness that they had? How could they even consider in the situation that they were in, that they were in the wilderness, et cetera, that they were surrounded by the all types of positive influences. They had the influence of they had the influence of the monk that they were eating. They had the influence of the what's called not just the man, but the Be'er Shel Miriam. They had the influence of the clouds of glory, and we know how much our surroundings and also what we eat influence us. So therefore, since all these things would influence us in the negative, chas v'shalom, if a person eats non-kosher food or he wears inappropriate garments, all these things we know influence the person and impact the person. So how much more so when they had all this positive influence, because they had the food that became min hashamayim, that came their flesh and blood, and that grew with them, and that was also completely spiritual because of the way it was grew with them. And then Nane HaKavod removed all the negative influences of the both physically of the snakes and the scorpions, and obviously it also removed it spiritually, and that was their home, and that was what they were embodied in. So how could the Meraglim, who were such important people and Chashva people, and not just the Meraglim, but the entire generation of the Midbar, how could they deal with how could they have fallen through in such a terrible crime and such a terrible doubting of Hashem's powers and capabilities? So, that actually it was this itself, that they had this type of awareness of godliness and total immersion in godliness. That was what led them to do this type of rebellion, if you will. And they said, we know that a person is not supposed to allow themselves to enter into a state of a test. We say it every morning in Shachar, in Birchsa Shachar. Like I mentioned, the Rebbe points out, even on Yom Kippur, it says, do not bring me to a test. And here, you want us to leave this perfect environment, the spiritual environment, the environment of Matan Torah, the place where they got the Torah, and the environment of the Mon, and the garments, and the Anane HaKavod. And you want us to go and invest our energies and dealing with the physical world, with the mundane things, that over there you need to have the Mesiras Nefesh, like the Rebbe introduced. You need to have the self-sacrifice, that a person is challenged by the fact that they have to commit to 1 year being off from work, which is the first commitment that they do, even though they're actually going to stop it only later on. But still in all, they have to, as soon, right away we speak about that one has to have the self-sacrifice to deal with this type of attitude and this type of approach. And this would have been a very great descent for them. And they said, why should we enter in this Nisayan? That's also, the Rebbe brings in a very geschmack of art. That's also the reason why they brought up about the Nephilim. They brought up about the Malachim, that they fell from heaven. They came down so low. Even though they were in Shemayim, they fell down. When it came down to earth, they fell down, came very low because of it. How much more so the Meraglim and the generation, the Midbar, that were by Matan Torah, how much further they would be from their source. And that's why they brought it up. Why should we and how could we do this? But part of the question also was, what was the response that Kalev said? When they said that we cannot do this, it's impossible for us to be able to handle this. So Kalev said, the land is very, very good. Only don't rebel against the Eibishter. This wasn't really responding to the complaint that the Meraglim had. So now we're going to explain how the Meraglim were wrong in their approach, not just because God says so, you got to do it. But how they were also, their entire approach was incorrect. Plus, what Kalev was saying when he said, and etc. So we're holding on the top of the 4th page of the mimer. In the printouts, it has the number 629 on the top. So here he's going to explain why the Meraglim were incorrect. So just very interesting, the order of the mimer. The first 2 sides of the mimer, the first 2 pages of the mimer says, how could the Meraglim have said what they said? Then the 3rd page of the mimer, we explained how they could have said what they said. Now we're going back to saying, but they were still wrong. Even once we explained it, they're still wrong. As though it is true. Because the perspective of Chachma of Kedusha, etc. There's room for this complaint. Do not bring us, etc., not to a test, etc. So this idea of not bringing us to a test is the core underlying premise of their complaint. And we said that they were Talmidim of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe Rabbeinu was Chachma de Gedusha. And since Moshe Rabbeinu was Chachma de Gedusha, therefore they approached everything with Seichel. Still in all, they should have actually listened to Moshe Rabbeinu instead of just taking the Chachma de Gedusha. Aval Moshe Rabbeinu Asher Shechina, but Moshe Rabbeinu, the Shechina speaks out of his throat. He sent them to enter Yisrael specifically, to be involved in the avodah of refining and elevating the sparks. Because from the perspective of this level, in other words, the level that's even higher than Chachma de Kedusha, the level of the Shechina speaking out of his throat, we need to enter Yisrael, as he's going to explain why that is so. This will be understood also what Kalev Yeshua responded to them, that if Hashem desires us, the content of the point of the response is the bechinas chayfetz, the level of desire, that is higher than will. It's higher than Chachma and higher than understanding and knowledge. So there's the level of a rotzen, and not just a rotzen, but the inner will. As we know that Chayim is talking about the inner will of a person. A person can have an external will to just want to do something because of some other reason that forces him to do it. He wants to go to work, but not really he wants to go to work. He wants the money from the work. He wants the food that he'll be able to buy. But chayfetz isn't the actual need and the desire that he wants. And that's the source of the Yidden needing to go into Eretz Yisrael came from a place way higher than Chachma of Kedusha, from the level of chayfetz. Because of this level, Hashem's desire is in us. Will bring us to this land. This is also where it says, yet but by Hashem do not rebel. The response and the complaint against this idea that the Meraglim should not do and not say what they were saying is the idea of rebelling against Hashem. True, you have logic on your side, and not only do you have logic, but you have logic of Kedusha. You have Chachma of Kedusha, like we said before. But it's considered a rebellion against Hashem, since this is the desire of Hashem. So we could stop right over here and just say, okay, that was the problem. The problem was Hashem desired it. You understood logically whatever you understood, even though it was the logic of Kedusha, but you're going against Hashem's desire, and desire is beyond logic, trumps logic, it overrules logic. Don't come to me with logic when Hashem desires it. But the Rebbe wants that everything should come down in Chochmah Bina V'das. It's not enough to have things being in a way of just do it because Hashem said to do it. Even though there's a mile in that Kabbalah soil, etc., etc. But there's an additional inyan that should come down even into Chabad, like the Rebbe is going to say. The oid, the chayfetz havayahu, the desire of Hashem is she'inyan zeh lo yishor l'mayla megeder avon v'asag. This topic should not remain beyond the category of understanding and comprehension. It's not enough to just not rebel because Hashem wanted it, but it's necessary. Part of Hashem's desire is that what we do, we should also appreciate, we should also understand, and we should bring down Hashem's desire into our understanding. And that's why Kol Levin Yeshua were not satisfied by just telling them, Al Timroidu, don't rebel. Kabbalah oil, that wasn't enough. They also explained. And that's what Kalev told them. The land is very, very good. Once we commit to following what Hashem desires, then we also see the advantage in it, that the land is good. Meaning, it's a very interesting, I think, order over here. He says, first, there needs to be the Kabbalah soil. First, there has to be Hashem al Timroid. Do not rebel against Hashem. Then, once we commit to do what Hashem wants, we will see the Gishmak in it. If before we even do it, we don't see the Gishmak, don't expect that there's all of a sudden you'll see the Gishmak. First, we need to commit. Once we commit, we even see the Gishmak in it. But that the land is very, very good. I'm sorry, Shetoiva Oretz Ma'oid, he's going to say, Ma'oid Namam. Hainu, Ma'ilom, Ma'ashoy B'tchil Sabriya, higher the beginning of the creation. Lefnei Achet, before the sin. Kishoylom, Veloyin Nivra. It says that the world, when it was created perfectly, completely. It wasn't lacking anything. Does Namarak Pamachas Minitoy Moed. When Hashem concluded the creation, he said he saw everything that he did, and it was very good. So at the beginning of creation, when the world was perfect, before the Chet Etzadas, it was Toiv Ma'oid, it was very good, but once Ma'oid. As opposed to descending into Eretz Yisrael, leaving the Midbar Sinai, leaving the Mon and the Anania Kovid and etc. behind. So then we come to a higher level. Ma'oid, base bomb and ma'oid. Very, very much. Twice the idea of very. Okay, Badrushim, like it's brought on the Mamar on this story of the Maragim. That ma'oid is incomparably higher than the level of very good. First of all, very good, we know Chassidus is good, is a limited good. When it says very, that means without limitation, without boundaries. But very, very good means completely and totally beyond even being beyond. Perhaps it's similar to what's brought down in Chassidus, that there's Memala Kalam, there's Soiv Kalam, which is Bli Gvul, and there's Kula Kamek Lochshiv, which is beyond Bli Gvul and beyond Gvul. So the question is, why does the descent cause such a great level that we reach even higher than it was before the creation? The reason for this matter is the higher something is, it descends in the most lowest place, specifically in the place of a test. And the lowest place, from over there comes down the highest of the high, like we mentioned before. They were saying, don't bring me to a test. But if Hashem brings you to a test, don't fight it. Work your way through it, overcome it. And then through the avoid in a place of a test, where, for example, like we said, he has to deal with earthy things and he has to deal with things of prohibition and kilayim and things like that. Still in all, over there you're going to reveal the idea of the highest level. This idea in the service of a yid down here in present day and age, the generation of the midbar surely they were also, prior to going into Eretz Yisrael, they were also involved in elevating sparks. It wasn't just that when they would come into Eretz Yisrael, they would elevate the sparks. And elevation of sparks is similar to one of the greatest mitzvahs. One of the greatest mitzvahs is redeeming captives. And the same thing, the sparks are considered captives in Klippa. And when a person elevates the sparks, he elevates the captives of Klippa. And he gives one example where they were elevating sparks. Surely they fulfilled the literal idea of tzedakah to poor people. This is a ruling in Shulchan Aruch to each and every one, that Shulchan Aruch applies to every yid. There has to be the giving of tzedakah at least once a year. A shlish shekel, even the poorest of the poor has to give that amount of tzedakah. So therefore, if Shulchan Aruch says that it's obligatory on every single yid to give tzedakah, so even in the wilderness, there must have been some type of literal form of tzedakah as well. I was, over the last few days, I was discussing this and thinking about it. What type of tzedakah was there possible if all the Yidden came out of the midbar with, says, donkeys loaded with all types of precious stuff, and the business hayam was even more than the business mitzrayim. So a thought fell into my mind that maybe this Bnei Yisrael and the eight of Rav that traveled with them, they were perhaps needy. They did not get from the mon, and they did not get all of these things. So the eight of Rav were the ones with whom one gave tzedakah to, whatever it was. But al kaponim, tzedakah is about the idea of elevation of sparks. So therefore, the Yidden, by doing tzedakah, they were elevating sparks. Similar to that, they also made brachas before eating, which is, as we'll soon say, it's connected with the idea of elevation of sparks. It's because they had also bread from the earth. How did they have bread from the earth? Despite the fact they had none, but also there were still the peddlers of the different that were surrounding where they were, that also peddled their wares, and people bought items from them that can be made into food. So from those items and that wheat or whatever, they would make hamoitz lechem and aretz. On this bread, they would make the bracha of hamoitz. It's explained in the different plays that the brachas that we make before deriving benefits from everything is about drawing down, and that's the drawing down the divine light that helps and brings about the refinement of the sparks of kedusha. That's the idea of redeeming captives, like we've said before. When we elevate the sparks, it's about redeeming captives. It's a great mitzvah. It's the ultimate level of tzedakah, is redeeming captives. An additional idea is the also on the mon, they made a bracha. So the fact that they made a bracha is also indicative that there would have been bir netzutzis, because we just now said that the bracha before eating or having any other physical benefit is to help and assist in the elevation of the sparks. This is also about elevating sparks of holiness incomparable to his previous level. So in other words, even though the bread that came from heaven, we mentioned earlier in the Maimer, was very, very high level, but as high as it was, there still is a level where you could bring it even higher than that. And that's why they had to make a bracha, even on the mon, because they were refining it to an even higher level. Well, that is a similar idea of bir we find that it says that Shevidon gathered and concluded all the camps that traveled. He would return lost items to their owners. He returned physical lost items and spiritual lost items. Not stuck. Obviously, that's the idea of tzedakah and love of fellow Yid. So again, you had the elevation of the sparks in the wilderness. So like you say, again, why should I go into Eretz Yisrael? What am I going to gain from Eretz Yisrael? He says, all this is insufficient. That Hashem has a desire in us, and He desires to bring us to the land specifically. The ultimate purpose is that the refining of the sparks should be in the lowest place. Not only in the wilderness, specifically in the land of Canaan, which is known to be not the most holiest of places before the Yidden elevated. And specifically there, in the Eretz Canaan, through the Yidden entering and doing over there, so the land becomes a level much higher even than it was at the beginning of creation. So now, again, we bring this back. We're trying to bring out how it's avoided by us in our day-to-day life. That is the human gamba we just Adam so to be understood in the service of a person. In a dogmas similar to the generation of midbar is to be found also now. It is a big Kodesh and Kisvei. Arizal like it's brought down in the Gersa Kodesh from the Arizal's writings. She has based in Neshamas B'Yisrael. There are two types of Neshamas amongst the Yidden. Neshamas Talmid Chachamim Ma'iskim B'Torah Kol Yimei. There's Neshamas Talmid Chacham that are involved in Torah their entire lives. They're similar to the generation of the Midbar. That their main avoid is not to be involved in refining this world. Then, as opposed to that, there's those neshamas that are involved not so much in learning. The majority of their day, they're not involved in learning. They're involved in tzedakah. I skipped a few lines. I skipped a line. So earlier we said the neshamas, in 2 lines earlier, said neshamas bali mitzvahs. There's neshamas of those that are involved in mitzvahs. They're involved in tzedakah and doing acts of kindness. This is divided into 2 categories of Yisachar, those that sit and learn, and Zavulun, those that go into business and support those that learn. Like I said before. Those that are involved in tzedakah are similar to the generation that entered Eretz Yisrael. This itself, it's explained over there in the Gersa Kodesh that the Talmud Chacham cannot be completely divorced from the idea of birur. Also, Talmid Chacham have to be involved in doing acts of kindness. Because every single Yid is obligated in doing the 613 mitzvahs. Including also the mitzvah of tzedakah. So even Talmid Chachamim have to do tzedakah as well. And this is also the halach of Shulchan Aruch, like we brought down before. Every person is obligated to give tzedakah, even a poor person. If a person should not withhold from themselves over a year from giving a third of a shekel. If he gave less than a third of a shekel, like tzedakah did not fulfill the mitzvahs of tzedakah. The Rebbe poses an interesting question up here. The L'chur seemingly we need to understand why you need to have the tzedakah in other ways. This Talmud Chacham, this one that seemingly, or this poor person, is doing what's on Shulchan Aruch. He davens 3 times a day, and in davening he's already refined the sparks. Surely he refines many different sparks of holiness in the service throughout the day. The Indian Birurin Nitzoitz is that Kedusha, the idea of refining the sparks of Kedusha, who in Pidin Shvuim canals, the idea of redeeming captives, like we said before. In Cain, if so, in a movement it's not understood. Because why is a person literally have to give tzedakah from his money? Why is it not enough that he's elevating the sparks and his davening and other physical engagements? Who can now, but the idea is, like we said before, because Hashem's desire is to be the refinement of the sparks, that specifically in physical matters, not just when he's davening, he's refining the sparks of Klippus Noigavas, Nefesh Abamis, and so on. And only through dealing with the sparks that's embedded in physical things do we come to the double ma'od that the land is very, very good. Then the Rebbe concludes, this is also understood concerning our generation. The generation of the heels of Mashiach. After we already have, since we already have both aspects. On the one hand, we're at the heels of Mashiach. On the other hand, we already passed through the entire wilderness of the nations. Golus is also likened to being in the midbar. The great and awesome, and the place of snakes and scorpions and poisonous snakes, and the thirst that there's no water. So therefore, this generation is simply like an ember saved from the fire. You do have the Parsh Baloischa that's known in the well-known expression in the Haftorah of 2 weeks ago. The will of Hashem, like it will be filled what it says in the continuation of the Haftorah Parsh Baloischa. Should dress you with nice clothes. That the ember that's saved from the fire will be enclosed with great and chashuvah clothing, till be what it says in continuation of Torah. But you see, I've seen it in a menorah of kula, that the entire menorah is out of gold, with kula al roisha, and it's a ball that contains the oils on top of it. Shiva Neresel Allah, and the 7 candles upon it. These are the 7 categories of the Yidden. There will be total perfection. That's what it means. Zav Kula, it's entirely gold. The Gula Mitzvah Shlema de Mashiach came to true and complete redemption through Mashiach, like it says over there in the Haftorah, not with might, not with strength, or with armies and with strength. Rather, with my spirit, says Avayitz Vakis, remain mamish speedily in our day. Mamash. Any questions?